this is the graffito of Esmet Akim, and it is the last known hieroglyphic inscription that we have. It dates to the 24th of August, 394. And you might say to me, how on earth do you know that? Because there's nothing in the script that says that. Well, that's because we can't read this hieroglyphic script alone. We have to read it with everything else that's there. So the script it says, before Mendula, son of Horus, by the hand of Esmet Akim, son of Esmet, the second priest of Isis for all time and eternity. And so I've got a little inscription here so you can see what it says, but it's not this inscription that gives us the date. And instead, it's this little demotic graffiti right underneath. And this is the one that gives us the date. And you might notice here that we have a slightly different spelling of the name. And that is because demotic, which is this little script here, is not a true one-for-one for hieroglyphs. You remember how I told you about there were different scripts? So you can use that same script in demotic to write two phases of the language. Or you can have a single phase of the language written in two different scripts. And it's not a one-for-one. So here, this is how we get the date. It's dated to year 110 of the Diocletian epic. And that is dated from 384. So 110 years later, we have the very last dated inscription of hieroglyphs. So for the purposes of this, what we're going to do today is think about this time frame from 394 to the 14th of September, 1822. Does anyone know what happened on that day? Very good guess, yes. It's what happened to the Rosetta Stone. This is Jean-Francois Champollion's sort of fatigue moment where he rushes into his brother's office and yells out, "I did it! I've done it!" He cracked the translation. So we're going to cover that period of time and think about what happened in order for him to get to that point 1,500 years later. All right, so I just told you that the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs died out, that the last known inscription is 394. So why? Why did it die? And the easiest thing to tell you is that there wasn't any one reason. It wasn't that someone came in and stopped everyone from learning the language overnight. It wasn't a sort of really graphic closing of all the doors of the temples. Instead, it was much more gradual than that. First and foremost, over a period of 400 years, Roman rule required all legal and governmental documents to be written in Greek. So if you're a native Egyptian and you're writing as part of the Ptolemaic government and then the Roman government, you're learning to write in Greek. So number one, you're in school, you have to learn a language. Do you learn Demotic or the Egyptian, or do you learn Greek? Well, Greek's going to get you a job. It's kind of like, as an art historian, people saying, shall I take biology 141 or art history 101? It's kind of that sort of judgment people are making. The second thing is the rise of Christianity in Egypt. And in particular, after 313, we see an ever-increasing presence of Coptic Christianity in Egypt. And this has great flow-on effects for the worship of the native Egyptian gods. We have the continual rise of Coptic language and script. And this, as Egyptologists, we believe to be the final phase of the Egyptian language. And with the rise of Christianity and the increase in instruction and education in Coptic script, the native scripts begin to fall out of favor. And then finally, we have the closing of the temples, gradually over a 200-year period. And with Justinian's closing of the last temple in ancient Egypt, the temple of Isis on the island of Philae in the early 6th century, there were no longer any places for education, because the ancient Egyptian temples weren't just places of worship. They were the schools, the pi'ank, the places, the houses of life. That's where you went to get a scribal education. So as the temples closed, as Christianity made pagan worship problematic, less and less people went to learn in the schools, and then there were less and less temples, less and less schools, and gradually there wasn't a single person left that could either read or write in the language. I mentioned about the rise of Christianity in Egypt, and Saint Shenouda has one of the most powerful moments in our destruction of the ancient Egyptian language. He was a powerful monk in the middle of Egypt, in an area today called the Sohag Governorate. And he ruled over an area called the White Monastery. And he was extremely, extremely powerful. He was a learned man, traveled widely. But he was also very intolerant of pagan religions. And he writes, hieroglyphs were prescriptions for murdering man's soul that are therein, written with blood and not ink alone. There should be nothing else portrayed for them except the likeness of animals. And during his reign as the head monk at the White Monastery, he sent his monks out into the countryside to erase the glyphs, to close the temples. He organized lynch mobs and small groups of people in order to beat God into these native Egyptians. He both gave education and suppressed education inside Egypt. And by 415, the last wealthy pagan woman, Hypatia, was lynched in Thebes. And with her lynching, the untouchable pagans at the top of society suddenly were no longer untouchable. Worshipping the native gods, reading the native language had become so dangerous. And those people were under such persecution that it was not ever worshipped in the open. So, the reason why we have our last inscription at the Temple of Isis on the island of Philae is because it was quite literally in the back end of nowhere. These people who were able to continue to read and write the language right to the bitter end didn't do so because they had some special skill or some special knowledge. They did so because they were quite literally out in the countryside, and everyone, I suspect, kind of forgot about them a little bit.